Good morning. Hope everyone had a very meaningful and transcendent Matan Torah. As I posted on the group, this will be a shorter class. I didn't want to skip it altogether, so I decided let's just do it. I have a speaking engagement this morning to the graduates of the girls' high school here. So get straight into it. So we're in Ayin Beis, Volume 3, review and summary. Literally 3 more pages till the conclusion. And conclusion means where the Rebbe Rashab stopped writing, because we know that he didn't finish the Hemshech. You can see it from the different questions that remain unanswered, different topics that remain unfinished. And part of our process here, why we're doing this, a second review, a second time learning this, is in order to help piece together what most likely would have been the conclusion of this Hemshech, based on the Maimer, especially the Maimer HaMakbil Sheves from the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe that we learned. So we're in the middle of you could say maybe the final theme of Ayin Beis as we have it, the Rebbe Rashab left us, and that is the contemplation in Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and Baruch Shem of Yechudei La and Yechudei Tata. Essentially, that captures, like he said, the cornerstone, the yesod of all mitzvahs and all of Torah, which is liyachid kutchebricha v'shchinte, to essentially experience the divine unity, the divine immutability, the divine reality in our existence. Because the whole purpose, of course, is Nesava Kadosh Baruch Hu, God desired to have a home in this lowest of worlds. And the process of creating a lowest of worlds has to be a concealment. That's the Tzimtzum, the Parsa. All the Tzimtzumim and all the concealments and coverings that allow for independent consciousness, which means us to emerge, so we can have the free will to choose and enter into a material world which ostensibly conceals the divine, but our avodah is to reveal the true reality, which is that everything really is Elokus. But the dilemma here is, of course, the goal is not just to discover that, but also to remain intact, that we don't get obliterated, annihilated in the process. So in other words, it's a process just like the classic example in Chassidus of a teacher and a student, that the student begins to study step by step, piecemeal, and slowly acclimate himself to the teacher's brilliance. You can't do that overnight. You can't do it in one quick fell swoop, because then the student would be overwhelmed or would have to require a miracle. And the goal is dira b'tachtenim, that it should come through our effort, with our tools, with our initiative, in our kelim containers. And as such, there's indeed a complex and elaborate process to reach that level of existence like ours, to connect and unite with existence like the real existence, which is God. So in that context, we have here, generally speaking, many, many levels, but generally, Yechudei Tata, Yechudei La, and the Yichud of both Yechudim. What he's been calling, what the last thing we learned is based on different perspectives. Daas Elyon, Daas Tachton, and the joining of both of them, that in Atzmus, he contains both, even though they're very opposite perspectives. So Daas Tachton means there's a Yesh. The Yesh comes to recognize the Ayin Eliki, the divine, mysterious, other reality, we can call it. So the Yesh comes to recognize. So it's Bitla Yesh. That creates Yechudei Tata. The perspective from above is that God, Atzmus, is Yesh Amiti, is a true reality. And everything outside of that, everything beyond that, is just an Ayin, complete, null and void, insignificant. That doesn't have any effect on him, Leishanisi, due to his immutability, like light doesn't have effect on its source. And even the light of the divine is also not affected, except the lowest levels, as we learned, the Kelim and Bria and the Kelim and Asiya. So these are two different perspectives. Then comes Kel Deis Hashem. That's the last thing we learned on page 1474. The Atzmus Kelul Beis Deis. Even though they're Hofchim Zemezeh, they're opposites, because one says there's no mitzias at all, and lo yesh Shelo yesh shum mitzias klal. That's Das Elyon. Das Tachton says, Yesh b'chinas mitzias, shabotel b'chinas bitla yesh levad. So there's a mitzias, but it's bottle. So obviously we're talking here all the avodah of bitl. We're not talking about someone who has not entertained avodah yet. But there are two different perspectives. Both perspectives are one. And that's really when you say Hashem Echad, you can't even split two divine perspectives also into two. You can split it into two once it manifests in the shtalshlus. You could say there's Das Elyon, the perspective from above, and Das Tachton, the perspective from below. But from Atzmus' point of view, everything is all one seamless unity. Shneim emes, shneim yichodim be'ein sof b'chinas bitl v'ayin mamish. So even the Das Tachton, which from our perspective means there's a yesh, there's a metzias, that's bottle, but from Atzmus' perspective, remember the Parsa and the Tzimtzum, which is necessary for us to even feel that we're a separate consciousness, has no effect on him as he continues on. The Gab Atzmus Hariyat Tzimtzum of Parsa ain't. What happened? What happened? Did something just happen?
I still hear you fine, as if nothing changed.
Oh, I thought that something blanked out. Okay, fine, good. Thank you. So from Atzmus' perspective, to use his words here, excuse me. Harikol inyan hefsa kaparsa hulagaba elamis vishtalshus levad bilvad. It's only from the perspective of our existence. Just 1 second. I'm getting a message here. I don't want this to die. Okay. Sorry. So he says like this. So the Gaba Elamis had Simsa Parsa Milo Master. And the Mokan Hamahavam and the source of their coming into being and their creation is Bechinas Richug Vavdola. Because for us to be able to exist, we can't, it's like the sun needs to have a sheath, we need to have some type of filter, many filters in order to exist. That's from our perspective. I'm reading from middle of page 1474. Doesn't conceal at all. So from that side of the curtain, so to speak, God's side of the curtain, there's no distance at all. And there's no partition at all. In addition, he adds, like it says, so an additional point, as I emphasized last class we learned about this, is that the Koyach HaHester itself, the very partition, is not coming from anywhere outside. It's also a divine power. And as we learned earlier, the divine power to conceal, like he says here, is just like the Bankan, because God is not closer to Gili than he is to Helam. Because he's not defined by Gili either, by expression, by revelation, by all of that, by those levels. So I'd say there's 2 points here. Number one, it doesn't conceal. Number two, and they're obviously interconnected, is that this Hester itself is part of the godly power. Bim Kain. So based on that, even Das Tachton, even the Ayin of the Yesh, which from our point of view is Bitla Yesh, which from our point of view is Yesh Ma'ayin, the Yesh relating to the Ayin Eliki, is Gamke Miyuchad B'chinas Atzmus Mamish K'may Eira Kol B'Atzmusei Shu B'chinas Ayin Shal Yesh Amiti. So the Chiddush here is that the two levels of Ayin, the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti, the Ayin of Yesh Aniver, are equal from the perspective of Atzmus. And therefore, even though by us is Bitla Yesh, but from Atzmus' perspective, even Das Tachton is also Ayin Mamish B'chinas Bitla Mitzias Mamish. And then he concludes, that's Ani Rishon V'Ani Achrin, So I am the first and I am the last. He says, Ani is the Oisius Ayin. What are the two levels of Ayin? Rishon and Achron. Rishon would be the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti, the Ayin of Keser. And the Achron is the Malchus, the Ayin of the Yesh Nivroim. And Akol Shava. And they're all equal. Ani Rishon, Ani Achron. Like he said earlier, Atu Mishanivra Atu Achle Nivra Atu Mishanivra. The same At, there's no change at all from that perspective. Shneim Shovim, everything is Meyuchid, Batzmus is Baruch. And then the continuing part of the phrase, because Mibiladai Ein Elikim. Elikim refers to the power of Tzimtzum. So Ein Elikim, a master of Mafsik Klal. Meaning, from God's perspective, Biladai means interpreting that nothing conceals. So therefore, there's no difference between both levels of ayin, whether the ayin after the tzimtzum that causes the ayin to create a yesh hanivra, and the ayin of the yesh amiti. Im kein k'moisha ayin aleph miyuchad b'atzmusei k'moi kein ayin habeis miyuchad b'bottle b'tachlis. So both levels of ayin are both equally bottle and completely nullified and sublimated and absorbed, all the different ways we translated it with Atzmus. Now, obviously you could ask the question, so why is it relevant to us? It's from perspective of Atzmus. From our perspective, we don't see that. So if you recall, we discussed that ultimately we're being told is because we can also have an experience like this. It doesn't happen right away. That's why you start with Daas Tachton and Yichud Tata. And then you go to Daas Elyon, Yichud Elah. But then you can come through this whole contemplation to the Yichud of both Yichudim. That's also included in Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Like he said very explicitly when he started the topic, you want to go back to the beginning on page 1466, where he said the Yichud of both Yichudim is all included in that in Hashem Echad. And we'll learn more about that in the next few pages as we come to the conclusion. So bottom line is, the fact is that even though we are an existing entity and we have to begin first recognizing our existence, and from our existence we come to extrapolate that there's a divine creator, an Ayin Eliki, and then we come to realize that the real reality is only Elikus, Daas Elyon, Yichud Elah, then we come to realize that existence and beyond existence are all equal from the eyes of God, in the eyes of God, and therefore even our very existence, as we'll learn, especially in the last page, on page 1477, a few pages from here, how it all becomes absolutely seamless one. So seichel, we can understand it right now, but to feel it, obviously, we feel ourselves as a yesh, as a mitzias. So we have to go step by step. That's a summary of the last that we've learned. Bottom of the end of the middle paragraph on page 1474. So what I'm going to do now is, because again, I'm shortening this class, and I apologize for that. We will continue tomorrow. I'll just give an overview of what comes next. And that is, he's going to ask a question. If that's the case, why do we call them two levels of ayin? It's actually, he's turning it around. If indeed the true reality from Atzmus' point of view is everything is one, and the only reason that we don't say that is because from our perspective that Tzimtzum does have an effect, a true effect, that we see a limited, you can say a limited experience of godliness, but from God's point of view, that means there's no two levels of ayin. So why do we call them two levels of ayin? And this is critical. Why? Because you could argue, you know what, there's no two levels of ayin, because only from our perspective, there's two levels of ayin. The ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, bitla Yesh, Daas Tachton. The ayin of the Yesh HaMiti, bitl b'mitzias, Daas Elyon. But from God's point of view, there's no two levels of ayin. But that would create a dilemma, because that means that we don't really fully unite ever with God's perspective, because the perspectives are very different. And he wants to say that even the ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, it was also planned by God. It's not just due to concealment. That's what he's going to answer. That there are two tracks that Atzmus essentially shows and will there to be two tracks. One track of everything is Elikus, Bittul Mitzias, Das Elyon. Another track is that there is an existence and there is an Ayin of an Ilaki that goes through a Tzimtzum into this existence. And they're both chosen by God. The only thing is that by God, it doesn't conceal, because God nothing can conceal before him. But he's going to explain that both of them, one does not evolve from the other. They're actually two tracks in Atzmus, which comes to add a whole other dimension that when we ultimately experience Achdus in Tachtonim, in the lowest of worlds, we're going to experience Achdus of the highest level. Because you could argue, you know what? Yes, okay, there's an Achdus on a higher level, but that's not accessible to us, or at least not completely. But since God wants to have a Yesh and Mitzias, and therefore employed the Tzimtzum and the Parsa and all the concealments to create that, so though it doesn't conceal before him, but it does conceal before us, but that too is part of the Atzmus plan. So it's not just the Atzmus says, there's a world, there's no reality except the Likus. No, I'm creating another reality. That senses due to the Tzimtzum that it's an independent reality. However, that and that itself is what I intend from Atzmus' point of view. So we're going to discuss this, of course, more at length, but that's what he's going to be now discussing in the next paragraph, the bottom of page 1474. So instead of just reading a few lines, I wanted to just give a general overview what he's going to explain. And with a very fascinating example on page 1475, by Mashpia and a Makabel, again, a teacher, student, that will help us understand it. Okay. Now, due to time, I said it'd be abbreviated, so I have to end the class. I know it's not so common. I don't usually do this. But again, I didn't want to cancel it entirely, so I hope you guys don't mind. And if there are any questions, if you don't mind, hold them till tomorrow morning, and I'll continue this. We'll continue this tomorrow and going forward. I'll give you my schedule. Next week, I travel to Israel with President Milei in Argentina, so I'll tell you my schedule tomorrow about that. Okay. So I said Shalom Aleichem. I say Tzeschem L'Shalom now. Again, I'm sorry about the shortened class, but I must go now. It's very late, right? Everyone have a very good day. See you all tomorrow.